Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar, Supporting Mental Health as You Return to Work. My name is Brandon Kristen, and I'm an account executive with HORAN. Basically, I work with employers to help mitigate costs and find creative ways to support their employees and provide better benefits. Really passionate about physical and mental health and wellness, which is why I'm here today. So this is a little different setup for us. We were trying to get away from the traditional Zoom, WebEx style virtual education. So as you'll see, we are in a studio. I actually feel a little bit like I'm on the Ellen show. It's a little odd not having a crowd here though. We're partnering with Prestige to bring this to you today. As we came in, we all wore masks. We all had our temperatures checked. We've been washing our hands. We've been staying distant. So rest assured that we are social distancing, but we wanted to try to give a richer experience for the crowd. In fact, there's even a sound booth outside where Prestige will be monitoring the questions and things of that nature. All right, before we get deep into the panel discussion today, we wanted to set the stage for mental health status of Americans right now. I think it's an understatement to say that the outbreak of COVID-19 has been stressful for everybody. And if it's not been stressful for you, well, you're the unicorn, you're the one. You know, you've probably researched COVID-19 ad nauseum. If you're in HR, which I know a lot of you are, you've probably been researching best practices, attended webinars for workplace considerations when you're heading back to work. But really it's important to think about what about the mental health of employees, their children and their families. So different than just the logistics of keeping them safe at work, what about the considerations for all the stress they were under when they were home and now as they transition back to work? According to the Kaiser Family Foundation, about half of the adults in the United States have said their mental health has been negatively affected due to worry and stress over the virus or some sort of peripheral piece of the virus. And if you think about that, that represents millions and millions of people whose lives have been impacted negatively. And so I think it's important to say that even if you don't feel like you've been stressed, but maybe it hasn't affected your mental health significantly, look to your left and look to your right. If it's not you, it's the person next to you. So in a presentation earlier this month that we had with our partners at Cigna, they shared the following data about the impact that COVID-19 has had on America's well-being. 21% increase in prescriptions filled per week for antidepressants, anxiety, and insomnia medications. An 18% increase in anti-anxiety drugs during the week of March 15th alone. And a staggering 40% increase in anti-anxiety medication for women. Everyone's worn a lot of hats throughout this whole process. I'm sure in your house, I know in mine. I can tell you this stat really speaks to me. My wife she's been a blessing through all of this, but just from something as simple as organizing all the Zoom calls for my kids, the Google Hangouts, making sure they're getting everything they need for school. It's been a stressful time for her, so I'm sure she wouldn't admit it maybe, but her anxiety has been up as well. Not surprisingly, everybody has responded to the outbreak a little bit differently. Demographics play a factor, socioeconomic status, where you live, the support systems that you have. But at the end of the day, mental health doesn't discriminate. It affects all of us in all walks of life. So according to the Center for Disease Control, people who might respond more strongly to the stress of a crisis include, not surprisingly, older adults and individuals with chronic diseases who are at a higher risk for severe illness from COVID-19, which of course, and then people who have mental health conditions, including problems with substance abuse, anxiety, and depression. In fact, mental health or mental illness affects 2.5 times more Americans than cancer, heart disease, diabetes combined, and $193 billion a year is spent on that. And a couple of those numbers might seem a little contradictory on your focus, but I want to make a point to say what we're going to talk about today is how individuals can improve their mental health as they return to work, but we're also going to touch a little bit on what businesses can expect with this increase in mental health issues. All right, so Mental Health America is the nation's leading community-based nonprofit, and they're dedicated to addressing the needs of those living with mental illness. As part of their service, they offer a free anonymous online screening, and they use the same evidence-based mental health screening tools that are used by most clinicians. I don't need to read the numbers to you here, but it's pretty simple that the numbers have increased dramatically. There are nearly 18,000 people who are newly positive for anxiety and depression since the beginning of the pandemic, and really we think that represents the tip of an iceberg. I mean, if you just think about, there are folks that aren't comfortable going out in public yet, let alone going to a doctor's office. There are folks that haven't self-identified that they have an issue and need help. So we think these numbers will really explode, unfortunately, in the next few months. All right, so real quickly, you're going to hear a lot of data today, and we wanted to give you an idea of where the HORAN-related data came from. Our mission really is pretty simple. We want to help employers provide a better quality of life for their employees and their families. That mission drives our investment in all things, but particularly in our HORAN financial analyst think tank. The guys in the think tank and the gals in the think tank really use this data to drive action and impact cost, and that's called HORANalytics. So when you see that today, we wanted you to know what it was. For every employer dollar spent on mental health, there's an additional $37 lost as a result of decreased productivity, absenteeism, and presenteeism. And so with that being said, supporting the mental health of your employees, it's not just the right thing to do, but it makes business sense as well. So on our agenda today, I'm going to introduce Brian Fissinger. Brian's a financial consultant with HORAN. He's going to talk a little bit about HORANalytics and how psychiatric claims can impact an employer's health plan. And then following Brian, I'm going to introduce our panelists to discuss strategies on how employees can be supported in their mental health endeavors as they return to the workplace environment. Brian?
Thanks, Brandon. Good morning, or good afternoon, everyone. As Brandon mentioned, my name is Brian Fissinger, financial consultant with HORAN, and I lead our analytics team. There's a few slides we're going to go through today that have some numbers on them that came out of what we call our Data Bite series. And so that's a series that we've been doing for a few years now to talk about the emerging trends in the market, actions employers can take to help address those. And we always try to combat or combine the data that we present with a clinical perspective. And as Brandon mentioned, we're going to leave a majority of our time today to get that clinical perspective from our panel. But also wanted to make sure that the data that we're seeing around mental health and psychiatric claims was part of this presentation and something that can be understood by the audience. So first and foremost, what does the life of a diagnosis look like around mental health? And so when we looked at our data and we partnered with the Linner Center of Hope for this study, what we saw was that at age 14, about 50% of people with mental health condition, they start to experience signs of that. And then by age 24, that goes up to 75%. And then at age 25, the brain is fully developed. But the initial diagnosis tends not to happen until age 39 to 40. So that's over a 20-year gap in members that start to see signs of mental illness to actually an official diagnosis happening. So something to keep in your mind as employers, as individuals that support your populations, what are ways or tools that can be put in front of your population that help make that diagnosis a safe experience and an easy experience for that member to pursue. And that's something that we'll get into in a little bit. And then so we also understand, as our Data Bite series illustrates, and as our panel today will talk about, there's a lot more to mental illness than just the financials. But at the same time, we want to make sure that you understand the impact to a health plan from a financial standpoint. So you can see that individuals with a mental health or a psychiatric claim, on average, cost over $10,000 a year to the health plan. And individuals without cost a little over $4,000 to the health plan per year. That's over a 2 times difference. I wish I could stand here and tell you that we found the mental health silver bullet, right? That there was something in the data that we were able to pull out and point to and say this above everything else helps control mental health claims. I wish I could tell you that it was PCP related. I wish I could tell you that it was drug compliance related. And both of those are incredibly important things, and I'm not trying to minimize the impact that those can have. But what we found in our data was there was not one thing that was going to help control that mental illness cost. And I think our panel today and some of the call-outs that we have later on will help to spark ideas for employers to think about as we continue to look at this data and continue to see it as an emerging trend. So 2 other more specific stats that we're going to talk about within mental health really quick are first within the prescription bucket. So, in general, pharmacy trends across the market are higher than medical trends and really driven by this increase in specialty drug spend. And so when we looked at the pharmacy costs specifically for these individuals with mental health or psychiatric claims, the difference was, on average, they had low costs per script. There was just a really high volume of prescriptions being taken. So the drugs themselves that this population is using, at least at a majority, are not expensive in themselves, but there's just a higher volume, almost 3 times as many drugs being taken by this population compared to individuals without a claim. And to just give you a few names of the most common ones that we see in this, I'll butcher the generic names if I try to say them, but you might recognize names like Zoloft, Lexapro, Prozac, are really the big ones that we saw as being really prevalent within this population. And then the last stat to share with you today before we jump into more of the panel discussion is around the inpatient admissions. This was the other area that jumped out to us as having a noticeable difference when we compared those two populations. And so what we saw here was the mental health population had 80% more inpatient admissions than individuals without at least without a diagnosed mental health condition. And so what that equates to is, on average, those admissions cost about $11,000. So when a health plan experiences 80% more of anything that costs $11,000 on average, you're quickly getting into 6 digits or more of additional cost. And the primary drivers that we saw there were major depression, substance abuse, and bipolar disorder. So hopefully that sheds some light on, from a data standpoint, from an impact to the employer health plan, the weight that mental health and psychiatric claims carry as we look at getting into this panel discussion and talking more about how we can help address that. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Brandon.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it. At this point, I'd like to introduce the other panel members today. First, we have Dr. Jennifer Farley. Dr. Farley is a psychotherapist and neuropsychologist who specializes in the assessment and treatment of children, adolescents, and young adults. She has a particular interest in the assessment of cognitive disorders such as ADHD and learning disabilities. Her specialty also includes diagnostic clarification of how affective mood disorders like anxiety or depression can complicate one's cognitive and socio-emotional functioning. Thanks for being here today. As a mental health therapist, women's life coach, international speaker, and author, Sherry Goldsmith works with individuals to help them identify the challenges that are standing in the way of them reaching their full potential. After enjoying a very successful career in business operations and program development, Sherry decided to go back to school to fulfill a dream of hers, receiving her mental health degree. Her vast business experience, combined with her mental health expertise and passion, gave her the perfect combination of skills to help women discover where they belong, subsequently reinventing their lives. Thanks for being here today. We appreciate it, guys. I'm going to pose the first question to Dr. Farley. So, Dr. Farley, what about the current situation is leading people to feel anxious and very unsettled and unsure?
I think it's the uncertainty of how this goes. I mean, when everything came to a grinding halt, the intensity of that certainly impacts everybody, and it tells us and our brains that something is significant, that it's a crisis. And of course, they had to do that for many reasons, to protect everybody. But then it's the uncertainty, it's the unknown. I have friends and also clients who are in the medical field, and I would read some articles about that of just it's almost like the pre-traumatic stress disorder is wondering what's going to happen. They saw Italy, they saw some of the effects of New York, and just wondering, how is this going to come? So it's almost like a big wave coming, but you really can't identify it. So it's the fear of just the unknown and how it will impact us and everything.
Yeah, that makes sense. I personally feel that at home. You're a little scared and you're not exactly sure why. Kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop. Mm-hmm. So Sherry, you've done a ton of work around resiliency. Can you give us an idea on what do you mean when you say, what is resilience? Why does it matter? And why does it maybe matter now more than ever?
Well, resilience is all about being able to bend and not break, being able to ride the waves of life and be able to get back to that previous state as quickly as possible, quicker than if you were not resilient. So I think understanding resilience, it's good to tell the story of Salvador Maddy, who was a founder of the Hardiness Institute. And he was doing research in Illinois Bell Telephone Company while he was doing research on stress. And in that time, they believed stress was something that we had to eliminate in our lives, which is impossible today, obviously, for a number of reasons. What are we going to do with our kids to stress us out? I don't know. But as you know, today we know we have to manage stress. So as he was in there working with these different people and doing research, they went through this mass restructuring, and they ended up laying off 50% of their workforce. There was probably, I don't know, like 12, 13,000 people let go. The people that were left were in just chaos. There was all kinds of restructuring. People had 15 different managers in 1 year. So you can understand and imagine what it was like working in that experience. So as he's working with these people and he's continuing to do his research, he recognizes that 2/3 of them are really struggling through this. They have physical issues like, you know, heart conditions and obesity and mental health issues, anxiety, depression, and drug and alcohol abuse. But he also finds that 1/3 of these people are not only surviving this, but they're actually thriving. And this was just incredible to him. And so what he recognized is these people had these 3 traits: commitment, control, and challenge. Commitment was the ability to really dig in and continue to live life to its fullest and find meaning and purpose. Control was these individuals were able to feel that they were controlling their universe and things weren't just happening to them. And challenge was they were able to look at this adversity and see it as a challenge, as an opportunity, instead of something horrible happening to them. So if we look at it in that context and look at what we're going through today, we can look at it as trying to continue to live our lives to the fullest. Reach out to people, maybe it's not in person, but it's on the phone, and continue to do meaningful and purposeful work and control what we can control in our lives. And see this as an opportunity to maybe take advantage of some experiences that you haven't been able to take advantage of.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think the opportunities that I personally had to spend more time with the kids, doing different things with the kids, it's kind of that opposite end of the spectrum from the anxiety that being at home all the time gives you, right? You get to actually build a deeper relationship, and it's been kind of nice. With that in mind, though, I know personally I had anxiety issues working from home. I like to be around people, and it was a very, very abrupt stop to that. But now as like work's coming back around, we're going to go back soon. I'm finding that I'm struggling a little bit in different ways. What kind of advice, Dr. Farley, do you have for parents that are going back to work and dealing with the stress around that?
Yes. So it's really helpful to think about it as not really putting pressure on oneself to think about needing to be 100% ready to go back, because if we were waiting for that, rarely, very few people would go back. So it's kind of thinking of this different construct, which is how can I feel mostly ready? Because then there's that margin of window to allow to be anxious. So part of that then is, how do we be empowered? Part of it then is looking at our own histories as to how we have how many different transitions we have dealt with in our past before, and then how, what was helpful for us. Whether it was women on maternity leave, dads who have taken paternity leave, and what that has been like being a full-time parent and then returning back. It could be even just from summer to fall for having kids at home to transitioning to the school year. That's also a transition. And then back to school year to summer is still another one. Times even when we might think that they're insignificant, but they are, is even when people were in college, what that transition was like going back. And so reminding ourselves of those times and what is helpful for us. Part of with the help with the transition is seeing what benefits there are on that other side. It's now we're going to have to be giving up some things with going back to the office, but what was beneficial before, what was my routine like before, I was capable. Sometimes when we were overcome by anxiety likes to lie to us to say we can't do something, and then it makes us paralyzed and stuck, where it's like, well, wait a minute, that's what I feel, but is it really true? And to remember, no, we are capable, but it's about easing into that back. Yeah, and seeing the positives and seeing how we benefit even at home, because the quality of life in some ways is more beneficial to be able to have the role of work being at work and then coming home and then being able to look forward to those things at home that we enjoy.
Yeah, that's a good point there. When you're working from home, it doesn't seem like there's a clock out time, right? It's
Exactly.
You might take the dog out during the day, but you're answering emails at night, right? Whatever it might be. Well, it sounds like resiliency would be a very big asset for folks to have during that process even. But I mean, are we born with resiliency? Are we set there? And if not, how do we build it?
That's a good question. So my company's Workplace Resilience, and if we're not born with it, I hope we can learn from it, because that's what I do. I help people learn those skills. So some people have more resilience than other people. I noticed when my boys were growing up, my older son had more resilience naturally. His temperament, he was just more optimistic. He was able to turn things around quicker than my younger one that seemed to kind of wallow in it and kind of stay there longer. And so you can learn these skills. I think that it comes with intention that this is what I want to do. I want to become more resilient, because we get stuck in our habits. We get stuck in responding to things in the same way every single time. So if we don't set that intention that we want to live a different life and be resilient, then we're not going to get anywhere. And resiliency is a lot about learning how to problem solve. I spend a lot of time, I still do some mental health therapy, and I spend a lot of time helping people learn problem-solving skills instead of getting stuck. And it's about taking action, and it's about learning how to realizing what you can control instead of focusing on what you can't control.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mentioned my kids before because we're spending so much time together, but another way that I've said that to my son, and I'm really kind of connecting dots here, is it's easy to be confident when things are going well. They're not always going to go well.
Right.
So you have to continually believe that you can do it and that you can come through. So, all right. So many parents are transitioning back to work, and funny enough, though they won't probably admit it, there's going to be a separation anxiety from their kids. What kind of tools or resources, or what can they put in place in their daily lives to help ease that for them and for the kids?
And I will say that sometimes even parents experience it of like letting go.
Yeah.
So, but in terms of with the kids, and the kids also model a lot by what the parents also set in terms of the tone. So sometimes kids might be even more anxious based upon what they're getting the sense of from parents. We know that typically more anxiously wired parents tend to model that for the kids, where the kids might not feel as secure in their attachments. So certainly setting the framework of setting this as a positive thing, that, even as an example, like if you've seen me at work, I get stressed, I won't be around, like it'll be good for me. And then it carves out, now that we're in summertime, that time for the kids to be kids. And, parents don't have to be teachers, at least there's this natural, thankful break into the summer now. But with the separation anxiety, it's like anything, it's another transition to help ease kids into it, which is how can they become more comfortable with whatever the situation is. Is it another parent who's going to be at home? Is it going to be another caregiver? Is it going to be a nanny? Is it going to be a grandparent? And easing into all of that so that if the adults with the situation can feel more comfortable and sell it, it's a lot of business work, like selling kids basically on the idea that this is fun. and it can be enjoyable, that they'll have way more fun than the parents. So sometimes then it's about setting up those little play dates, if you will, with easing back into it. It could be an hour. Maybe the first time to do it is, with the parent still there, so that the kids can model from the parent how easy it is for the parents to let some of that anxiety go. And then to have some plans in place, like, you know what, I've got to go to the office or I'm going to get in trouble. So, making up some things to carve out some time, and maybe the parent just stays at home for a couple hours, but gets a sense of what that's like to also then be separate from their kids, to know what it's like on the other side, which is what we typically enjoy even as parents, is what did you learn at school today? What did you do when I'm not a part of your life? And what was fun about it? Yeah, so kind of separating those out.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head about the homeschooling issue. I can tell you that's going to be a huge relief to my wife and I that we don't have to do that any longer.
Yes.
And if you enjoyed that process, again, you're the one. You are the one. So it was a grueling last few months. So Brian, we've talked a lot about employees coming back to work, parents coming back to work. Have you seen any changes in the way employers are addressing this, specifically around telemedicine and telepsychiatry offerings?
Yeah, so two really come to mind. I think that there's been a behavioral health component to telemedicine for at least a couple years now, but it was something that employers sometimes had to opt into, or was something that they added on maybe without thinking about it sometimes. And so I think part of it has been reassessing that offering to determine, is it part of our offering today? And if not, we've definitely seen some employers add it on to what they have. But then I think where even more attention has been spent has just been on the education piece, just reminding their employees and their members, what resources do you have through your plan that can help you, stay out of a hospital in certain situations. And I think what we're really interested to see is when we come out of all of this, how is that utilization of telemedicine, telehealth going to continue, right? Is it going to continue to pick up and stay strong coming out of this? Or are people going to revert back to wanting to get into the hospital and see their doctor in person? And so I think that's going to be interesting to see.
Yeah, good point about utilization, which kind of leads me to a follow-up question. We talk to employers all day. It's our job. They want to do what's right for their employees, but at the same time, they're stressed financially right now. They're going to ask us, well, if we want to implement telepsychiatry or even the mental health coaching on site, like, what's it going to cost me from a claims perspective? How's it going to affect our bottom line there? What would you say?
Yeah, so I think that there are certain services that are going to be priced in a way that's similar to what they would experience elsewhere, right? And so in some situations, it's going to be dollar for dollar. But I think the bigger savings just comes from a comfort level with using the technology that is put in front of you. And I think that matters because, how many times do we hear, and this is mental health or not mental health, but how many times do we hear about a parent, rushing their kid to the ER for something that ends up being a common cold? And it's, I'm a parent, I have an almost 2-year-old. I understand the inclination, I understand that. But I think as people get more comfortable with the technology, I think it could produce a savings when you avoid some of those places of service or incidents that have just naturally higher cost associated with them when there doesn't have to be.
Awesome. So Sherry, why are these changes so hard for us? What happens internally and in our heads that make it such a challenge? We think we're good and we're on the go and we can adjust on the fly, but then I get to go back to work, which a month ago was an awesome thing, and it's hard for me. Can you kind of explain how that happens?
I hope I can explain that. So first I want to say that all human beings struggle with change. We all struggle with change. I always love it when people say to me, oh, I love change. Okay, maybe I believe you. Because you've probably learned to love change. Because we all struggle with going through change. And we all have to work hard to continue to want to change and push ourselves forward. And there's a lot of reasons why. One, we feel safe. We know what to expect when things stay the same. We like that feeling as human beings, to know what to expect. And we know that we're competent in what we're doing right now, and then all of a sudden you want me to do something different. Will I be as good at that? And there's always the whole thing about our habits, the way that our brains work, and you could talk more about this, but 40% of our day is made up of habits, and we need these habits because it enables us to get a lot of things done fairly fast. And then when everything changes and we have all these habits and routines, it throws us because we're used to getting things done and we don't even have to think about them. And now we have to think about them, and it takes more energy for us, and we don't like that as human beings. So here we are, we probably got all used to being at home, and we have these new habits and routines, and now we're being upended again, and we have to change over again. It's hard. It's a struggle.
Yeah, definitely. Well, to piggyback off of that, I mean, it seems like everyone's adjustment time is on a different schedule. Is there a certain length of time, Dr. Farley, that it takes to return to business as usual, or is it just a matter of, as we said, habits and doing it every day?
Right, and I think to piggyback on Sherry, like it depends on a lot of different factors. One is like one's own personal resiliency. Another is where their predisposition is to having experienced, again, transitions before with stress. And so what we know is, like, just like with bereavement, let's say, everybody can experience it, but then it's just some people linger, it lingers for some people more than others. The magic window is really within 6 months. So we're looking at what we call adjustment disorders. So they're not necessarily a full-blown anxiety disorder or depression, like major depressive disorder, but adjustment disorders are fairly common, and it's a matter of understanding that whatever an emotion is being experienced, whether people are experiencing more depression or anxiety, that there is a natural, understandable trigger to it. So we know that kids might have it when their parents get divorced. We might have it even when we get married. And so it's just that natural transition. But usually with adjustment disorders, most of them resolve within 6 months. So again, it's just that, just depends on that timeline as to what resources are in place, one's own temperament, and how that all goes.
Interesting, okay. So, you know, we've heard in the past that, you know, social media can be toxic. Then over the last, like, 8 to 10 weeks, social media has been one of our only outlets to connect with people. Sherry, what impact does it have on resiliency, if any?
Well, it's one of my favorite topics, social media. I'm a big observer, and I go on social media, and I love to watch what people are talking about, and so I can understand how people are struggling in their emotions, and I see so much anxiety. And I see such a need for them when you're feeling anxious and out of control, and there's a lot of people feeling out of control. We want to find a way to control our world, and you could speak to this. And so I see a lot of blame. If we blame it on someone else, if we can attack someone else, that gives us a sense of control and a reason for why this is happening. We have to find out why this is happening. So I see a lot of anger. I see a lot of talking back and forth, mean nastiness with people that are quite aggressive, and I see it as anxiety and them not being able to go through the steps they need to go through to get to the other side, to acceptance that this is happening and I have to deal with it and control what I can control in my life.
And just to add a little bit, I think of it, when this was all going down with the toilet paper phenomenon, I wondered how much of that was directly associated with social media. Because if somebody posts, oh, there's like none here, and then even people who wouldn't have been worried about it, then it's the social contagion of, oh, I wasn't anxious about it before, but maybe I should be.
She's exactly right, and I will piggyback on that. I was in Vancouver probably around March 9th, March 10th, where things were just beginning to percolate and happen. And I was walking downtown Vancouver, and I'm always observing. That's what I do. You probably do the same thing. And I turned to my husband and I said, so what's the deal with the toilet paper? And he said, what do you mean? I said, haven't you been noticing people are walking around with toilet paper? I had no idea what was going on because I had been disconnected. But it was happening everywhere.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's safe to say that there's no nuance on social media, right? When you speak with family and friends, you can have a conversation, but you're on one side or you're on the other, and you're right. They're gonna yell, and nobody's gonna convince anybody of anything, and it really ends up being unhealthy, and you feel
unhealthy.
I've never heard anybody say they got into an argument on the internet and felt better about themselves.
Never.
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 Yeah.
No.
All right, so Dr. Farley, there was an article in Forbes magazine recently, and it talked about the jump in digital peer support groups. So kind of the opposite of like social media is not always healthy, but sort of the online platform and the support groups associated with those.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that and why it might be valuable?
Right. And so this is the perk of sometimes that social media aspect of like at least trying to reach out to find the resources. And, you know, just like telehealth, and I've been doing, you know, this has been a new avenue for me as well. We know that peer-to-peer groups can be really wonderful. We think of NAMI's peer-to-peer support program here in Cincinnati that's been really wonderful for a lot of people. We think about even Alcoholics Anonymous, and just the advantages of being in a peer group can really be helpful. So doing it digitally is a wonderful format for people to know that they're not alone. There is one of the aspects of even mental health and why therapy is so helpful is the aspect of universality, that somebody might feel so odd being thinking that what's wrong with me, I'm the only one, nobody will understand me, everybody seems to be doing everything so much better than me. And then they realize when they talk with somebody, oh, you do that too, or you think about that too. So there's this aspect of that. And we've heard the saying, misery loves company, but what's much more true is misery loves miserable company. So, and it's not to wallow, it's really what is the purpose of finding other people who have been experiencing something. It's, again, we're not alone. And can you give me ideas? How did you manage it? So this is why it's so great, like when people have coaches or when people have sponsors, is that person has had more experience and knows the signs and knows, you know, what helped for them, and then they can be a mentor for somebody else. So it just makes sense that thankfully we've got, you know, different avenues by which we can do that and still keep connected with people.
Yeah, I think relatability is big. You want to know that somebody understands what you're going through, right?
Yes.
So you mentioned NAMI. Can you expand on what that is, and then maybe even go into a little bit about if I wanted to find a digital support group, where would I look?
Sure. So NAMI is just National Alliance of Mental Illness is a national organization. If anybody's ever heard of the NAMI Walk, it's actually coming up like virtually, but.
Is it?
Again, it's another modification of ways to get the information out there, right? So what's great is that there's different chapters, and we have different chapters even in Ohio. And the Southwest chapter of Ohio is a fantastic resource. Even going online and looking at where there's different meetings, different groups, at least in the pre-COVID era, but then finding out like where, you know, how to get connected with those resources online. It's just in terms of psychoeducation, with patients who are struggling with mental illness themselves, but not just the patients, then the families, the caregivers, and supporting obviously, you know, those individuals as well as to how do we also understand it so that we can help our loved ones too. Awesome. There's a lot of good resources there.
Great. So we've talked a little bit about kids today, and though today is a little bit employer-based, many of us have kids, and we're dealing with that, and that's causing our stress. Sherry, how do kids fall on a resiliency scale, if you will? I mean, we've basically said you can't see most of your friends, you can't be as social as you were for 10 weeks, and now it's opening up. Like, are kids more resilient than adults? If they're not, what can a parent do to help their kids build resiliency? Is it different than how an adult would build it?
Oh my gosh, well, I know that you'll definitely have something to say to this, and I would say I find kids to be better at adjusting to situations than adults. we've had these whole lives to get stuck in our routines and our habits. They're just starting out. And of course, it depends a lot on their temperaments. Like when I talked about my two sons before, and I saw the differences in their temperaments, but they are willing to adjust. I think a lot of it matters on parents and if they model that behavior. I was always hyper aware of that, especially with my younger one. And I was always prepared when I went into situations to relay the message that, okay, I know this is tough, but, you know, we can do this. And, you know, I didn't allow him to see that maybe I was scared. I didn't want for him to absorb some of my feelings. So I was always prepared in how I would relay information to him and how we would handle transitions. And I also pushed him more because he needed more pushing. But I think we gain resilience by pushing our kids to maybe make that mistake and for them to fail and for them to see that they can fail, make a mistake, and they recover and life goes on. And if they don't have those situations, they don't have those experiences, you hold them back and try to protect them, then they're not going to be able to gain resilience. When they go through bad things, they learn that it's going to be okay. It'll pass. I've gone through things before, and I'll be able to get through this. It'll all be okay.
And I understand you have something to add.
Well, I'm just thinking of it even in examples. Like, even I was laughing at, like, whenever I've ridden a roller coaster for the first time with one of my kids, what do? I walk them through it. Of course, I'm nervous, but I'm not panicked. I mean, clearly I stepped on the roller coaster as well. But I'm thinking, like, what do I do with my kids? This is one opportunity. You will never see things this high. So look around you. It's okay. You're safe. You know, yes, we're going to go down this hill, but we chose to be here. So I always look at it empowerment. You could have chosen not to do this in some ways, like, but where's that empowerment? And especially when I work with teenagers, I always look at credibility and empowerment. If you're going to speak, have some credibility. So be careful about your words because you want to be understood. You don't want to ever be written off as a teenager. Let's say she's just a teenager, you know, or anything else. It's like have credibility, but it's that empowerment. It's again, where do you have control? And where do you also recognize that you don't? And to be able to model that, okay, like, you know what, I don't know what's coming, but there's also, like, I call them constants, if you will. Like, regardless of whatever is going on, this is what we know and this is what we have. And so just being able to anchor to that no matter what happens, there's things that we can have and do.
It's interesting. It almost sounds like it's okay to be aware of the dark side, but you don't want to live there. You want to live on the bright side.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Sherry, can you talk a little bit about post-traumatic growth and how it might apply in our current situation?
Sure. So post-traumatic growth is that ability to go through bad times, to go through times of chaos or traumatic experiences, and to be able to get to the other side and to be able to reflect on that experience and find some meaning in it and purpose and be able to grow from that experience.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, so I've got one big question for both of you. And it really revolves around the lines between work and non-work. I think some folks, and my employer's clearly watching, are worried that this blurred line, this never-ending workday, is going to continue even when you're back in the office. That will be the expectation because it's the expectation now. I know some employers are worried about productivity. I mean, not some, all, right? You want to make sure your folks, if they're home, you still want to make sure they're being productive. But do you think they should be more worried about the productivity side or really the burnout side of that?
So it's interesting. So I was thinking about this a lot. And if we think about it from productivity, it's more from the business standpoint as to how does our business gain. If we think about it in terms of burnout, then the focus is much more on the employees. And we know that if the employees get burnt out, then we know that the productivity is going to take a hit. But then, especially because if there's more focus on the fear-based, you've got to stay this busy or else, we might risk, whatever it might be, then it's like parenting out of fear versus parenting out of growth. And what do we know even from those models is that if we parent from growth and we meet people where they're at and understand and kind of validate that, yes, this is tough for a lot of people, then it's a matter of then how do we support the individuals and the employees, as opposed to, again, having it fear-based and creating even more anxiety than that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gary?
People are not productive working nonstop. I know my husband would disagree with this, but I know it for a fact. You need to take breaks. You need to walk away. You're not going to be as productive if you go, 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 go. I mean, I'm sure that Dr. Farley has seen all kinds of studies that prove that.
Yes.
And so companies need to accept this, that if you want the most productivity out of people, then you need to give them the time to re-energize, to walk away,
Right.
and to take that break and to get that energy again so they can go back and give their 100%. You can't give your 100% hour after hour after hour, constant.
Right.
I think that's especially tough right now, and I think a lot of employers would say, when we're in the office, we see everybody working. We feel good about it. We know they're working hard. We're not questioning it. When they're at home, we feel need to put more checks and balances in place because it worries us, and that becomes, frankly, as an employee, that becomes even tougher, right? And another stress, like, how do I handle this, and how do I make sure that I'm going about my day? So I think you both had great answers to that. I think it's a concern that everybody's going through right now.
The other thing to add to that is that if there's not the recognition of it, then it can create resentment.
Yeah.
And that we know is, we want employee and an employer relationships to be healthy and not fester that resentment and that anger.
And what you just described was a loss of control.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
You not knowing what's going on. I don't have control of this situation. I don't know how hard these people are working.
Yeah.
And so there has to be that trust there.
Yeah.
And when that employee knows that you have that trust, they want to work hard.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Did you hear that, Mike? Just kidding. Just kidding. So we've heard a lot today about mental health issues, and really it sounds to me like there's going to be an influx of people needing help, both from Winter Center on resiliency. Brian, this is really a bigger conversation about claims, I guess, but in the data that you and your team look at, how has the mental health claims changed just over the last 10 weeks, and how is that kind of correlated or backed up against the general claims?
Yeah. So we looked back over the last year and over the last 4 years, and this is a trend. This is an area of claim activity that is just not slowing down. And so when we looked at the last 4 years, so we looked at volume, like activity of claims, and we looked at cost of claims. And over the last 4 years, the volume of claim activity increased 35% in the mental health space over the last 4 years. Over the last 1 year, it's increased 17%. The costs over the last 4 years have gone up 40%, and over the last year have gone up almost 10%. So this is something that is not slowing down, seems to be at least on par, if not outpacing what we're seeing in some of the other medical cost areas. So definitely something that is not going away, and I just think the current situation that we live in is obviously only perpetuating that and not helping it slow down.
So the mental health claims that you're seeing, how do they correlate with other chronic diseases and or comorbidities, and does that make it even more important for a diagnosis?
Yeah, absolutely. So we saw that over half of the mental health claimants that we looked at also had at least one chronic condition. The most common was hypertension or high blood pressure. Almost 25% of the mental health population was also impacted by high blood pressure. And then the other interesting thing that we saw was from a cost standpoint, there was a lot of cost associated with cancer claims. And you two might be able to speak to some kind of connection there better than I can from a clinical standpoint. But usually cancer ranks maybe number 4, number 5. And for this population, it ranked number 2. So definitely a higher cost there than we traditionally see when we look at our book of business and our clients' data.
You wonder about cause and effect there, right? The stress that you're under with a sickness like that can lead to mental illness.
And what's tough, I would even say right now, like when people, because I've known people who've had to undergo chemotherapy. Well, if chemotherapy completely compromises your immune system and you're immunosuppressed, then you've got to stay away from people even more. And so what we're learning really is human connection. Like we knew this before, but we're experiencing it now. That even with phone calls and with doing video chats, it's a good Band-Aid, but not good enough. Like we really do need the human connection in person.
It's not the same.
It's just not.
Yeah.
It's not the same.
Even today, and obviously the audience doesn't feel this, but just the energy in this room has been a nice change from being alone in my office all day. So
I agree.
it's been really good. So for Dr. Farley and Sherry, are there any tools or services or innovations that have arisen out of this that folks could use to help with mental health?
I think I can speak really to what my frame of reference is, and it's been teletherapy. I will say this, because a lot of my friends have been asking, because now everybody that I've seen is either on the phone or through video, just depending on their own personal preference. And I have to say, I was nervous to make that jump, but of course, then I was forced to make that leap. My phone calls, like my sessions now, are actually going to the full amount. So surprisingly, and really in a great way, is that like the people that I do see are really utilizing their sessions. So if there's any worries about, gosh, what it would be like to see a therapist talk with them over the phone or do video, it has really been effective, and it's been really nice to have that ability. So I could see, even after this returns to some kind of different, whatever that might be, that I think, and of course, like people could pay for that out of pocket, but now that they've really been kind of put in this situation to see and to experience it, is that it might be nice. Maybe they're running a fever of 100 and they don't want to come into the office. I don't want them coming into the office, but could we do a teletherapy appointment? And especially if you're in a mental health crisis that we want to avoid, that it's more worth at least having a session instead of trying to force coming into the office or having a no-show fee or whatever that might be. So definitely the resources there.
Yeah, and I think it's probably part of a different presentation, a different day, but that leads up to the whole, hopefully this leads to better network access around mental health for employees, which I know is a challenge today. How about you, Sherry? Are you seeing any different kind of innovations or any programs that have popped up? Are you doing things significantly differently?
Well, yes, I'm doing things definitely differently. Most of my work when I'm going into organizations is in person, so I really had to make the change and adapt to doing things in webinar style in my office. And I have to tell you, I can make it work, but it is different because I really am more of an extrovert and I depend on the energy from the people. And so I really have to psych myself up for doing this. It takes more energy for me. It takes more energy, but I've adapted to doing it that way. And also, I also have been doing telehealth because I do still have 12 hours of mental health therapy clients. And it was really interesting because at first I was getting none. I work with Citibank and no one was calling in. And then all of a sudden it hit with new clients. It's like they hit a wall and they couldn't take it anymore and they were really struggling. And so it's a change because I'm used to seeing that person in the room, but you adapt. And like any change, you are uncomfortable with it in the beginning and you make, you push yourself, you make that change, and then you make it work. And it's been really effective.
Awesome. So we had a really great question from Rob Brown, and I know we're getting close to wrapping up. If you had to give a close friend one piece of advice on how to make it through the next month and transitioning back to work, what would you tell them?
I got it. Take it one day at a time. I think the biggest mistake people make is that they look at it as a whole, as the big picture, and you can't do that. You have to take it, break it down into small chunks, take it one day at a time.
It's very true.
Yeah.
Very true. And it can be even, sometimes we think about time, that if we get anxious about something,
Yeah.
I recommend people think about the time. This is not going to be, forever. If it's, I often use an analogy of the weather. If it rains, all of a sudden are we all anxious and depressed because it's never going to be sunny again?
If we're at our home office away from our work office sometimes.
So there's always something, it's like, okay, well, it could be even breaking it up in the morning. And, what am I going to do at lunch? Like my first day back, what am I going to do at lunchtime? What can I do as a break? And just anchoring to small bits and pieces of time instead of the whole. Because if we look at it as a whole,
It's overwhelming.
it's overwhelming. And we get fatigued, we get anxious. And what do we do when we get, anxious? A lot of people want to avoid.
Yeah.
And they would rather not even want to think about it, talk about it, anything like that. So that whole, planning, like failing to plan is planning to fail. Is if we don't think about it even, we're not doing ourselves any good.
Thanks. So we're close on time here, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. Thanks so much, guys, for being a part of today's panel. A lot of great answers, a lot of great information. If anybody in the audience has additional questions, send them in anyway. Somebody from HORAN will reach out to you this week with an answer. And so as we wrap up today, wanted to share some recommendations that can help you support your employees. A lot of these, and we hit this earlier, a lot of these are things that you know about, that you already have in place, but that aren't getting utilized properly, maybe not getting communicated as often or as clearly as you like. But you need to have a behavioral health strategy. You need to have an employee assistant program. I'm sure you do, but you need to make sure your employees know how to access it and what they have available to them. Maybe consider mental health coaching. Currently at HORAN, we do on-site, it's supposed to be health coaching, but I think a lot of folks already kind of use Melanie for the mental health aspect, but maybe think about bringing somebody specifically in for mental health coaching. Financial coaching or literacy is huge right now. People are really worried about money. They're worried about furloughs, layoffs. That would be something that they would not forget and they would really appreciate. And again, use your partners in the community, use Lender Center of Hope, use resiliency workshops. There are tools out there, and if you access them, they can really help your folks. So thanks again for joining today. You'll receive a couple of emails. One will come today. Really, it's a feedback email, and we really, really request that you respond. This is the first time we've done something like this, and we need feedback to make sure that we're at our best or what we can do better. And the second email will come later this week, and it will have your continuing education credits in there as well. So thank you, and everybody have a great day, and good luck getting back to work.